Summer 1457. An Ottoman army 80,000 soldiers strong crossed into Albania with absolute music certainty. They had siege towers, war elephants, cannons that had shattered the walls of Constantinople itself, and for 3 months they found nothing. No fortresses under siege, no armies forming battle lines, no resistance. They music could see just abandoned villages, scorched fields, and silence so complete it felt deliberate. The Ottomans were hunting an enemy that refused to exist. Supplies dwindled. Disease spread through the camps. Soldiers began deserting in the night. What started as a conquest became something else, a slow unraveling in a land that seemed to swallow armies whole. And then on September 2nd, when the Ottoman commanders finally believed music, the threat had dissolved, the mountains came alive. What happened next wasn't music, just a defeat. It was the kind of humiliation empires spend centuries trying to forget. This is the story of how one man armed with nothing but patience and intimate knowledge of his enemy's pride turned the most powerful military force on earth into a case study in strategic frustration. Music. And it starts with a boy who was supposed to become the empire's perfect weapon. If you've ever wondered why certain histories disappear while others dominate, you're in the right place. Crimson historians excavate what the world buried: missionary letters, Ottoman archives, forgotten testimonies. Every like, every subscription. Music exposes another humiliation. Empires tried to erase 1443. Music. 20 years before the trap closed, a child, maybe 8 years old, walks through the gates of the Ottoman imperial court in Ada. His name is Gurj Kastrioti, son of an Albanian lord, and he's been taken, not kidnapped, traded. This was the Dev Shima system, a policy. Music so methodical it barely qualified as cruelty. The Ottomans would identify the sons of conquered nobility, offer their fathers a choice that wasn't really a choice, and absorb the children into the empire's military machinery. The logic was elegant: turn your enemies' heirs into your most loyal generals. For 2 decades, music, it worked flawlessly. With Gurj, he was placed in the palace schools where the empire trained its future commanders. He studied military engineering, cavalry, music, tactics, logistics, siege warfare. He learned Ottoman, Turkish, Persian, Arabic. He converted to Islam and took a new name. But more importantly, he learned how the empire thought. He learned that Ottoman strategy relied on a single overwhelming principle: shock and mass. Assemble force so large that resistance feels irrational, move so fast that enemies panic before they can organize, create the impression that opposition is futile, and then watch most conflicts resolve themselves before a single arrow is fired. The system worked because most enemies music believed in it. By his Medentes G, now called Skanderbeg, Lord Alexander was commanding Ottoman armies. He led successful campaigns in Anatolia, in the Balkans. His reputation reached the Sultan's inner circle. His commanders praised his music discipline, his tactical precision, his loyalty. And then in November 1443, during a messy skirmish against Hungarian forces near Skanderbeg and 300 Albanian cavalry under his command, simply left. No announcement, no dramatic speech. One moment they were part of the Ottoman line, the next they were gone, the empire had spent 20 years sharpening a weapon, teaching it every vulnerability in their system, every pattern in their music, thinking, every assumption they made about loyalty and control. And now that weapon was walking away, carrying 2 decades of their secrets with him. What Skanj understood what the Ottomans would take years to realize was that the Dev Sherma system had a fatal flaw. It assumed that loyalty could be manufactured music through education. An opportunity, it assumed that a boy taken from his family would forget where he came from, but Skanderbeg never forgot. He just learned to hide that memory behind perfect obedience until the moment obedience was no longer useful. The Ottomans had created their own enemy. They had given him access to their war rooms, their strategy sessions, their internal debates about where the empire was strong and where it was brittle. They had shown him how decisions moved through the command structure, how supplies were allocated, how intelligence was gathered and analyzed, and most critically, they had taught him to think music like an Ottoman general, which meant he knew exactly how an Ottoman general would respond to any given situation. This wasn't just defection, this was the exploitation music of a systemic vulnerability. The empire didn't know it. The Ottomans had built a machine for turning music conquered children into loyal commanders, but they had never considered what would happen if one of those commanders decided the machine itself was the enemy. Skanderbeg didn't just reject the empire, he understood it so completely. That rejection became a form of weaponized knowledge. What happened next reveals something essential about how Skanderbeg operated. He didn't attack the Ottoman fortress at Krira. He walked through the front gate. Skanderbeg music had spent years inside Ottoman administrative systems. He knew how orders moved, how documents were sealed, how governors verified commands. So he forged a letter. The document claimed to be from Sultan Muad II himself, ordering the governor of Kruger to surrender the fortress to Skanderbeg. Music. Immediately, the forgery was so precise. Right in music, correct phrasing, authentic seal, that the governor never questioned it. He simply obeyed without siege engines, without casualties, without even raising suspicion, until it was too late. Skanderbeg took control of Albania's most music strategically important fortress. The Ottomans lost the position not because their defenses failed, they lost it because someone understood their bureaucracy better than they did. This wasn't just deception. This was institutional knowledge turned against the institution. Skanderbeg knew that the Ottoman Empire, for all its military power, ran on paperwork, on chains of command, on the assumption that certain documents carried unquestionable authority. He knew that a governor stationed music in a remote fortress wouldn't have regular contact with the Sultan's court, that verification music would take weeks, that by the time anyone realized the order was fake, it would be too late to matter. He knew all of this because he had been part of the system that created these vulnerabilities. The empire's size, which was supposed to be its strength, required layers of bureaucratic trust, and trust Skanderbeg music understood could be manufactured. When Sultan Murad II learned what happened, the response was immediate. Music and army was dispatched, not for Negotiation for erasure, the Battle of Tavil, June 1444. Music. Ottoman forces estimated between 25,000 and 40,000 soldiers marched toward Kruya, expecting to crush a minor rebellion. A matter of days, Skanderbeg had. Music, maybe 8,000 fighters, mostly light infantry, no siege equipment, no cavalry reserves, standard military. Doctrine said this was suicide. Skanderbeg did something the Ottomans never anticipated. He used their own tactics against them. He positioned his smaller force in terrain the Ottoman cavalry couldn't easily maneuver through. Then he staged a false retreat, a classic Ottoman maneuver, drawing the heavy cavalry into overextension. When the Ottoman horsemen charged forward, assuming the Albanians were breaking, they found themselves isolated from their own infantry. Skanderbeg's forces counterattacked from concealed positions in the hills. The result was a slaughter. Thousands of Ottoman soldiers were killed. Music. The rest retreated in disarray. It was a victory, but the real damage wasn't on the battlefield. The real damage was psychological. An Ottoman trained general had just demonstrated that the empire's tactics, music, were predictable, that their reliance on overwhelming force created exploitable blind spots, that the empire's strength was also a pattern, and patterns could be broken. The Ottomans had developed their military doctrine over decades of conquest. It worked against music, fragmented European kingdoms, against disorganized tribal confederations, against enemies who fought the way the Ottomans expected them to fight. But Skanderbeg wasn't fighting the way they expected. He was fighting the way they had taught him to fight, and then adding layers they had never music considered. The false retreat wasn't just a tactic. It was a mirror. The Ottomans' music used feigned retreats constantly to draw enemies into vulnerable positions. It was so common in their playbook that opposing armies had learned to recognize it. But when Skanderbeg used the same music tactic against Ottoman forces, it created a psychological trap. Ottoman commanders knew about feigned retreats. They knew music. They should be cautious, but they also knew that recognizing and exploiting an enemy's broken morale was how battles were won. So they charged anyway, caught between their training and their music. Suspicion and that hesitation, that split second of uncertainty, was all Skanderbeg needed. He wasn't just defeating a music army, he was defeating a doctrine, and that's what made Tavil so devastating. It wasn't about the casualties, it was about music, what those casualties represented. The Ottoman military system had been revealed as something that could be studied, understood, music, and systematically exploited by someone who knew it well enough. For the next 13 years, the Ottomans and Skanderbeg fought a war that barely resembled war. There were no grand battles, no sieges that lasted months, no dramatic field engagements where fate was decided in a single afternoon. Instead, there was erosion. Ottoman armies would enter Albania with 30,000, 50,000, sometimes 70,000 soldiers. They would march toward key positions. Music, set up camps, prepare for confrontation. And Skanderbeg would dissolve. His forces would fragment into small mobile units that struck supply lines, ambushed patrols, and vanished before music reinforcements arrived. The Ottomans would control territory during the day and lose control of it at night. There was no front line, no army to pin down, no single target the empire's overwhelming power could crush. This wasn't guerrilla warfare as desperation. Music. This was guerrilla warfare as doctrine. And it made the Ottomans look impotent. Sultan maimed II, the man who conquered Constantinople, who broke the Byzantine Empire, who was being called the conqueror across 3 continents, took this personally. In 1457, he assembled one of the largest invasion forces the Balkans had ever seen. Over 80,000 soldiers, experienced generals, Mehmed's own nephew commanding cavalry divisions, and Skanderbeg's nephew Hamza Kastrioti, who had defected to the Ottomans and now stood ready to destroy his uncle's rebellion. This wasn't a punitive expedition. This was a statement. The army entered Albania in late spring, and for months they found exactly what previous invasions had found: nothing. Villages abandoned before the Ottomans arrived, fields burned, wells poisoned, no supplies to seize, no populations to intimidate, no enemies to engage. Army was immense and completely useless. Soldiers began dying from disease, from hunger, from the psychological weight of marching through a land that felt hostile in its emptiness. Commanders argued, morale collapsed, desertions increased, and Skanderbeg music waited. The Ottoman strategy had always been built on momentum: enter a region with overwhelming force, win a decisive battle, install a garrison, move to the next target. The speed of conquest was part of the psychological weapon. It made resistance seem futile, but in Albania there was nothing to conquer. No armies to defeat, no capitals to occupy, no kings to capture, just terrain that swallowed armies and gave nothing back. And the longer the Ottomans stayed, the weaker they became. This was the genius of Skanderbeg's approach. He understood that the Ottoman Empire's greatest strength, its ability to concentrate massive force music at a single point, was also its greatest weakness. Those massive armies needed food, water, supply lines stretching back hundreds of miles, medical care, morale maintenance, all of that. Infrastructure was vulnerable, and in mountainous terrain where visibility was limited and locals knew every path, every cave, every water source, that vulnerability became fatal. The Ottomans weren't just fighting an army, they were fighting geography, climate, logistics, and time. Every day they stayed in Albania without achieving a decisive victory. Music was a day their soldiers grew weaker, their supplies ran lower, their commanders more frustrated. Skanderbeg didn't need to win battles, he just needed to make sure the Ottomans couldn't win them either. And in that stalemate, in that refusal to give the empire what it needed, he was destroying something more valuable than territory. He was destroying confidence. The Ottoman military system was built on the assumption music that problems could be solved with sufficient force. That resistance would break when confronted with overwhelming power. That fear and shock would do most of the work before a single soldier engaged. But Skanderbeg wasn't afraid. His forces weren't shocked, they were patient. And patience, it turned out, was something the Ottoman system had no answer for. By the summer of 1457, the invasion was collapsing music under its own weight. Soldiers were deserting, supplies were running out. The army that was supposed to erase Skanderbeg's rebellion was instead being erased by it, slowly, invisibly through 1,000 small failures that never resulted in a battle. Music the Ottomans could win or lose. By late August 1457, Ottoman commanders made a decision. The rebellion was over. Skanderbeg's forces hadn't been seen in weeks. No raids, no ambushes, no resistance at all. The logical conclusion: the Albanians had music, fled, dispersed, given up. So, the Ottoman army set up camp on a wide, open plain near Ujabada. It was a music textbook position, flat terrain, good visibility, easy to defend. The kind of place where a massive army could rest, resupply, and prepare for the march home. For the first time in months, the Ottomans relaxed. That was the mistake. September 2nd, 1457, music. Dawn. Skanderbeg's forces, which had never disbanded, only hidden, launched coordinated assault from the surrounding high ground, multiple strike points, simultaneous attacks, forces hitting the Ottoman camp from directions that shouldn't have had Albanian fighters in them. The Ottomans weren't prepared for combat. Many were still sleeping. Music weapons weren't distributed. Command structure was fragmented. What followed wasn't a battle, it was a massacre. Albanian cavalry tore through the Ottoman flanks, infantry units collapsed. Music under pressure from fighters who knew the terrain, who had spent months preparing for this exact moment. Hamza Castrioti, Skanderbeg's own nephew, the defector, who was supposed to lead the empire to victory, was captured alive. Skanderbeg didn't execute him immediately. That would have been simple. Instead, Hamza was imprisoned, publicly humiliated. Music sent as a message. By the time the sun set, the Ottoman invasion force was music shattered. Casualty estimates vary, but sources suggest between 15,000 and 30,000 Ottoman soldiers were killed or captured. Survivors fled in chaos. Maimed II, the conqueror of Constantinople, had been handed one of the most embarrassing defeats of his reign, and it wasn't because he was outfought, it was because he was outweighted. The trap at Ujabada worked because Skanderbeg understood something fundamental about how armies think. After months of frustration, after chasing an enemy that refused to appear, after losing soldiers to disease and desertion rather than combat, the Ottoman commanders needed to believe the campaign was over. They needed a narrative that made sense, that allowed them to return home without admitting complete failure, and Skanderbeg gave them that narrative. He disappeared completely, stopped all raids, pulled back every visible force, let the Ottomans believe what they wanted to believe, that the Albanians had finally broken, that the rebellion had dissolved. Music under pressure, and then when that belief had settled into certainty, when the Ottoman army had relaxed into the comfortable assumption that music danger had passed, he struck. This wasn't luck, this was psychological warfare conducted over months. Skanderbeg had spent the entire summer training his forces to wait, to stay hidden, to resist the urge to harass Ottoman patrols even when opportunities presented. Music themselves, because he knew that the real opportunity wasn't any individual ambush, it was the moment when the Ottomans stopped music looking for him when they transitioned from combat readiness to the administrative mode of wrapping up a campaign. That transition, that psychological shift, created a window of vulnerability, and Skanderbeg had spent months engineering that exact window. The attack itself was a demonstration of coordination that shouldn't have been possible for a force that was supposed to be scattered and demoralized. Multiple units striking simultaneously from different directions meant that Skanderbeg had maintained command and control even while invisible, that his forces had been positioned, supplied, and briefed without the Ottomans noticing any of it. The Ottoman scouts had reported empty mountains, and they were right. The mountains were empty of visible threats, but Skanderbeg's forces were there, camouflaged, music, disciplined, waiting for a signal that would only come when the conditions were perfect. The casualties at Ujabada were devastating, but the real damage was reputational. Mechmed II had conquered Constantinople, he had broken the Byzantine Empire, he had defeated Crusader armies, and now he had been humiliated by a regional warlord in a conflict that wasn't supposed to last more than a few months. The empire's enemies noticed. Christian kingdoms in Europe who had music spent decades terrified of Ottoman expansion, suddenly saw a crack in the facade. Skanderbeg, symbol not because he won a single battle, but because he had demonstrated that the Ottoman military machine could be frustrated, exhausted, and embarrassed. Music, if he refused to fight on their terms, that the empire's size could be turned into a liability that patience and terrain knowledge could neutralize. Numerical superiority. After Ujabada, music, something changed. The Ottoman Empire didn't just want to defeat Skanderbeg, they needed to erase what he represented. Mechmed II personally led multiple invasions. He brought the same siege cannons that destroyed Constantinople to the walls of Crudia, massive bombardments, prolonged sieges, attempts to starve the Albanians into submission. None of it worked. Even when the Ottomans held territory, they couldn't hold it securely. Supply convoys were raided, garrisons were ambushed. Every victory required such overwhelming force that it became unsustainable. The empire was spending vast resources, money, soldiers, political capital on a conflict in a mountainous corner of the Balkans that refused to end, and the reason it refused to end wasn't military strength, it was strategic patience. Skanderbeg never tried to conquer Ottoman cities, he never attempted music to hold large territories. He didn't build an empire of his own, he just made sure the Ottomans couldn't build theirs in Albania for 25 years. When Skanderbeg died in 1468 from illness, not in battle, the Ottomans finally managed to absorb Albania into their empire, but the cost was staggering. Decades of music, campaigns, thousands of soldiers, entire generations of commanders who learned that overwhelming force doesn't matter if your enemy refuses music to let you use it. The humiliation wasn't in any single defeat, it was in the fact that the Ottoman Empire, the most powerful military force, music of the 15th century, had been dragged into fighting one man's war on his terms for a quarter century and never found a way to make him stop. The question that haunted Ottoman strategic planning for decades afterward wasn't about tactics, It was about something more fundamental. How do you defeat an enemy who won't give you the kind of fight you're built? To win, the Ottoman military system was designed for specific scenarios: field battles where numerical music superiority mattered, sieges where superior artillery could break walls, campaigns where speed and shock could force capitulation before enemies, organized resistance, all of that, doctrine, all that institutional knowledge became irrelevant against someone who simply refused to participate music in those scenarios. Skanderbeg's war didn't fit into any category the Ottomans had developed strategies for. It wasn't a siege because there was no static defense. Music to break, it wasn't a field battle because there was no army to pin down and destroy. It wasn't a rebellion because there was no political structure to negotiate with or decapitate. It was something else entirely: a sustained refusal, a conflict-defined music, not by what Skanderbeg did, but by what he wouldn't allow the Ottomans to do. And that inversion of initiative, that constant denial of the decisive confrontation the empire needed, was more psychologically damaging than any battlefield defeat, because it revealed that the Ottoman system, for all its power, had a gap. It couldn't force someone to fight, it could only create conditions where fighting seemed like the rational choice, and if someone was willing to endure those conditions, willing to sacrifice short-term gains for long-term resistance, the empire's leverage evaporated. Skanderbeg proved that the empire's reputation for invincibility was built on opponents who believed in it. But if you didn't believe in it, if you understood that the empire's strength was a performance that required your participation, then you could simply opt out, and in opting out, you could turn the empire's greatest assets into liabilities. Their large armies needed massive supply chains. Their reliance on speed meant they couldn't sustain prolonged stalemates. Their need for decisive victories meant that ambiguous outcomes. Music felt like failures. All of these structural features, which had been strengths against conventional enemies, became vulnerabilities against someone who understood music, how the system worked and where its breaking points were. The Ottomans never solved the Skanderbeg. They outlasted him. When he died, his coalition fractured. Without his leadership, the Albanian resistance couldn't maintain the same level of coordination. The Ottomans moved in, installed their administration, and claimed victory, but internally, among military planners and strategic thinkers, the Albanian campaign was studied as a cautionary tale. It demonstrated that the empire's power was music conditional, that it worked when enemies engaged on Ottoman terms, but when someone refused those terms, when someone was willing to trade conventional victory for sustained denial, the empire's options narrowed music dramatically, and that lesson, that vulnerability, influenced Ottoman strategic thinking for generations. It made them more cautious about campaigns, music in difficult terrain, more aware that overwhelming force didn't guarantee overwhelming success, more conscious that music, reputation, and psychological dominance, while valuable, could be systematically music eroded if an enemy was patient enough and disciplined enough to withstand short-term pain for long-term effect. Skanderbeg's resistance wasn't just about Albania, it was a proof of concept a demonstration that the Ottoman Empire could be resisted, not through superior armies, but through superior patience. Skanderbeg didn't win by being stronger, he won by being ungovernable. He understood something most of his music contemporaries didn't, that the greatest weakness of an empire built on absolute music power is that it can't function when someone refuses to acknowledge that power. The Ottomans could field 100,000 soldiers, but they couldn't field them against an enemy who wouldn't stand still long enough to fight. They could conquer cities, but they couldn't conquer patience. For 25 years, one man turned the empire's greatest strength, its size, its certainty, its belief in inevitable victory, into the mechanism of its own frustration, and that's a form of defeat no amount of soldiers can erase.